Greetings to you all. My name is JJ Hornblast, Executive Editor and Publisher of Auto Finance News, and I'm pleased to welcome you to From Startup to Success, Building an Auto Finance Company, presented by Center for Auto Finance Excellence, the new industry resource that shares best practices and actionable advice with auto finance professionals. The Center for Auto Finance Excellence was launched last month by Auto Finance News in partnership with Fiserv. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is the first of a series of webinars presented by the Center for Auto Finance Excellence through the generous support of Fiserv. I'm pleased to introduce the sponsor of this teleconference, Fiserv. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Pete Radike, the Director of Origination Product Management for Fiserv, for some brief welcoming remarks before I introduce today's speaker. Pete?
Thank you, Jay. This is Pete Radike, and on behalf of Fiserv, we appreciate the opportunity to both sponsor this webinar and participate in these best practices presentations. Thank you for that opportunity, and we also would like to welcome all of the attendees today to take advantage of this pretty exciting webinar topic in terms of From Startup to Success, Building an Auto Finance Company. As we all know, the auto finance industry is certainly having a robust year so far, and it looks like it's going to continue for some time to come. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to sponsor this event and look forward to doing so in the future as well.
Thanks so much, Pete. We really appreciate your participation and look forward to continuing to work with you on the center. During this webinar, which will last about 30 minutes and is being recorded, Navin Bathija, founder and CEO of NEO, will offer unique insights into the auto finance industry and auto finance industry entrepreneurship. He'll offer a presentation on best practices for developing an auto finance company, which will be followed by a Q&A hosted by Marcy Bellis, a director of the Center for Auto Finance Excellence and an editor of Auto Finance News. The substance of this teleconference harkens to just some of what we do at the Center for Auto Finance Excellence. The center is a new resource developed for the benefit of the entire auto lending and leasing community, and we encourage you to join the center at autofinanceexcellence.org to receive content and insights on the practice of auto finance. Please note that details on accessing the recording of this teleconference will be available on the center's website as well as on autofinancenews.net. And now it gives me pleasure to introduce my friend Navin Bathija, founder and CEO of NEO. Launched in 2010 as an auto lender to consumers new to credit, NEO developed risk assessment technology and default analysis based on borrowers' real-time financial and social data rather than on credit scores. Recently, NEO shifted its business model to sell its technology to other lenders. Navin, like any good entrepreneur, has shown an ability to adapt as well as to navigate the unique byways that are the auto finance sector. We're pleased that he's here with us today to share some of his startup experiences, and it gives me great pleasure now to turn this call over to him. Navin?
Thank you, JJ. First off, I wanted to thank the Center for Auto Finance Excellence, Fiserv, and Auto Finance News for this opportunity. When I was approached to talk about this topic, clearly I felt passionate about doing startups and felt this would be a great forum where we can share best practices. What I present today is my learnings and other things I've been taught by my mentors. And I would welcome the opportunity after this during the Q&A and even beyond the Q&A if you want to reach out to me to engage in a discussion on what's best to do when you're launching a startup. My contact information is obviously in the presentation if you want to reach out to me. Just a little bit about my background. I have a lot of financial services experience, over 15 to 16 years of building financial services products, specifically lending products for JP Morgan, Wachovia, Dun & Bradstreet. And then I bring a broad education across engineering, finance, and MBA. So as you can see, the background of a founder is pretty important when you're launching a startup. It doesn't mean you need to know everything about the space, but having domain knowledge does help. It helps prevent surprises that I've seen other founders trying to do lending startups face with regards to the kind of regulation that exists in the industry or basic knowledge of processes like origination through securitization. So when you're looking to do a startup, definitely it helps if you have domain knowledge in that space. And of course, my startup Neo is in the business of alternative data and credit risk assessment based on that, specifically for auto lending. At Neo, we have built out technology that connects to any bank or prepaid card provider in the US. And with a customer's authorization while they are at the dealership, we pull in their bank transactions, do a deep dive analysis on it, and present that analysis to the auto lender so that they can make a more informed decision of loan. Obviously, for a subprime borrower or a thin credit borrower, this helps a lot because the critical missing piece beyond the bureau data is their current financial situation, and we have seen this help get better loans done, favorable terms to borrowers, and such. This was just a little bit background on Neo because I'm going to be using Neo as an example on a number of slides as we go forward. Now, jumping into startups, a typical startup milestone, the early stage, before a company scales to go on to either be acquired or become public. The first few phases are thinking of an idea that would actually think would work, building a team because you cannot do it alone. You need a core team with specific skill sets, raising funds. And by raising funds, I mean it doesn't need to be venture capitalist money. It could be friends and family. It could be saving money to bootstrap your company, but you do need funds to start a company. And then the critical phase of achieving product market fit. Product market fit is nothing but figuring out what's the first basic version of your product that serves the need of a specific set of customers so that you can make money out of it or use that product as a means to show that the business would work and then go on to scale and launch it with a large number of customers. There are two graphs on the slide. The first one at the top is the outsider's view of a startup. This is the academic view. As you can see, until a startup achieves a product market fit, which typically takes 3 to 4 years, you can see that the line is flat. Everybody outside the startup knows about the startup when it's scaling and when it's become popular, and they just think that it magically came to this stage through a phase where they didn't really have any growth and it was pretty flat. But as you can see at the bottom graph, what happens in that flat curve until you're getting product market fit is pretty chaotic. It starts with thinking of an idea, having a real initial enthusiasm, and then as you start talking to customers or you start trying to do the startup, there's a reality check. There are a lot of bumps along the way until a time comes when you're running out of money and push comes to shove and you have to focus really hard on what's important to make the startup successful. And all the startups who are able to do that go on to become great startups that have scaled to a significant set of customers. But as you can see, the flat curve is not really that flat. It's very chaotic as far as a startup is concerned. And startups have one goal: achieve product market fit before your enthusiasm or your team's enthusiasm and the money you have raised, whether through friends and family or through an institutional investor, runs out. Because the primary reason why startups die is they run out of money and business just stops. So let's talk best practices. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on the first 4 critical phases, getting to product market fit, and best practices around that at least I have learned. And I'm not really going to talk that much about scale in this presentation. So let's talk about ideas. Typically, the idea that's successful for a startup is the idea that tackles a big market, like Neo is in the business of auto lending, and that's pretty huge. In fact, in general, we are in the business of lending. We know our technology can apply to other forms of lending too. It solves a big problem. Credit risk assessment is somewhat of a problem. There is general knowledge, especially that something better than FICO is required, specifically for subprime and for thin credit lending. Also, the product needs to provide a 10x improvement over existing products. The reason for that is customers are already entrenched in current products, and for them to switch or even consider using something new and cutting edge that they still don't know how it fits into their processes, then they need to see a significant benefit. And that's pretty critical. If you just come up with a marginal improvement over an existing product, your chances of getting traction become really low because most customers don't really want to spend the time to adopt something new. Having a favorable market trend that's ongoing helps a lot. There's a big buzz about alternative data and how it can potentially help in lending and specifically auto lending that's going on these days. And clearly that helps Neo at least initiate initial conversations with some of our customers because they are interested in this data set. And finally, I'm a big proponent of technology. I think technology helps in many ways. It helps you scale once you have gotten a product market fit and scale very efficiently. It also helps you set up metrics that help make decisions that are not completely based on human judgment. And I think that's important specifically in credit risk assessment that you have these metrics that you look at, and technology provides a way to mine those metrics on data sets. So definitely having a technological edge in your product helps with regards to getting to success. Once you have that aha moment and the idea you want to follow, you need a team. A team is required mainly because you alone cannot do everything, but it's critical in the early stages to pick team members that have complementary skills. Everybody in a startup has to wear multiple hats. A person that's responsible for business development also needs to do certain level of product development and creating requirement sets and such. So be sure to pick people who complement your skills. You definitely need them to be passionate about your idea. They cannot think of this as a 9-to-5 job. Anybody who's passionate about the idea will go the extra mile. And that's, in fact, a very important filter for us as we look to get more people on board. Do they really like what we are doing? During the interview process, did they have other thoughts and ideas on how Neo's product could be better because they felt this is a need that they have seen in the past and that they can contribute towards? And finally, it's a little counterintuitive that most companies hire employees who don't want to start their businesses. They feel that if we hire an entrepreneur or somebody who wants to do his own business, he would leave and we won't have a long-term employee. In fact, for startups, the reverse is true. You should look to hire people who are entrepreneurial. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to start something. They just don't have all the knowledge. And they feel working for your startup would get them to a stage where they can start something on their own down the line. These are the kinds of people that give their best while they are working for you. They might be with you for 2 years, but they will give their 200% because they themselves feel they are in the same boat and have the mindset of not being in a 9-to-5 job. Now, Neo raised it's funding through an institutional investor. So this slide about fundraising is somewhat structured with regards to raising money from a VC. Some of these may still apply if you're raising a friends and family round. And I'm going to talk more about what challenges you face when you're trying to raise VC money, specifically for a tech startup. A typical first-time founder in Silicon Valley of a tech startup has to talk to about 50 to 100 investors before they close their financing. That's a lot of investors. Investors are busy, and it's really difficult to get their time. More importantly, imagine a founder who's passionate about this idea and has to hear at least 49 to 99 no's is the way I look at it. Every no hurts. I realized that when I went out fundraising, and within the first few set of investors, I made myself a promise. I'm going to try and minimize the number of no's. And I followed a certain strategy that I think helped in raising funds from the 24th investor. So I just had to listen to 23 no's. What I did was focused very early on, to meet only with investors that invest in my space, instead of just meeting with any investor who would listen to me. I think that was important because we could have a meaningful conversation around the startup. We could discuss challenges and figure out if the startup was ready for investment money. And I could get real feedback because they had experience in this space. Two, I also realized that the founders of the companies in which the investor has put money, so basically part of the investor's investment portfolio, make the best references. And those led to the most meaningful conversations. The investors already felt strongly about the founders because they had put money in them. And then my job was to convince the founders to get me connected to their investors. And having a great idea and something that rhymes with a lot of people definitely helps. When I sat in front of founders, they found my business to be at a maturity stage where it could take money in, and they made the right connections. And finally, if you're hearing no's as part of the fundraising process, which quite frankly Neo did, we went out fundraising, and within 6 weeks after meeting with about 20 investors, I started getting feedback that there was something missing in the business. There were two things I had to fix. And a lot of founders at that point just start to continue to meeting with other investors because they're just trying to figure out how best to raise funds. They started this process. It was tough to start the process. Why should I stop it? Well, the tough decision is to stop it and fix the problem. And Neo did that. After 6 weeks, we stopped funding, took about 3 months to fix the problems, went out again, and within 3 weeks, talking to 3 other investors, I had raised my funds. And I think the fact that we took the time to get the business to a certain maturity and not talking to more investors helped, because every time an investor says no, you have lost their attention for the next 1 year. They're not going to invest in your company. That's just the hard fact. So once you've raised funds, the next step, the critical step for a startup is to build their product, get some initial set of customers, and get to a product market fit. Basically, enough traction that shows our first version of product works for a certain segment of customers, and the business is worth investing in further. In my experience, early adopters make the best customers. Auto finance industry is a very regulated industry. Sales cycles are very long. It's very tempting to go after the big fish and a bigger lender and try to get them because you suddenly get a huge amount of volume. But usually those are the deals that would take a long time to happen. And even if they happen, they may not work out the way you think they would work out. The key thing here is to experiment fast and experiment quickly because you only have so much money left to launch the business. And early adopters decide really fast. All of the customers that have adopted Neo 100% made decisions in hours and not weeks. They wanted only a functional product and not a polished one. They were willing to work with us, knowing that if they at least get enough information to make informed decisions on credit transactions, they were happy with it. They didn't care if a product was polished, looked nice, and such. So that really helps keep your product development costs low in this early stages of a startup and still get critical feedback. And early adopters love to provide feedback. They want to work with you. They have the same passion about the idea as you do, and that just makes it having conversations easier with them. So remember, early adopters make the best customers. So once you have these early adopter customers, you want to be able to get the product to a stage where it's ready for adoption by other significant set of customers who are not early adopters. The key thing here is you want to be controlling costs in the early stages of a startup, because if you run out of money, your business dies. And the best way to keep that cost low is to only build features that customers request. It's very tempting, because you're passionate about the idea, to sit in a room and think of features that you think would be helpful to customers. But quite in fact, a lot of times you end up building features that customers never use. So we only build features once a customer has requested it, and we build them fast. Another thing to remember also is, if you build unused features and you launch them and nobody uses it, it's not just the cost of development of the feature, the upfront cost, it's also the maintenance cost. And that itself is a huge lifetime cost for unused features. And it's just going to continue to pile on as you grow the business. So stay away from unused features is a key takeaway. And once a customer requests something, build it fast and release it often. We do weekly to bi-weekly releases. And customers love that, because they just got a feature they recently requested. Compared to other bigger companies that they are working with, they find that we are very receptive and quick in responding, and they just feel that we work better, we produce better than other companies they are working with who takes months to deliver something. So as a startup, that's very important, being able to thrill your customers. And then the last piece about product market fit is to be adaptive. And this is in general true for the startup. You have to be adaptive, and you have to pivot your way to success. So pivot is a term I would like to define at this point. Pivot is nothing but a key change in your business strategy that has implications on your business model. So in case of Neo, for example, we started with saying we want to be an auto lender in this space. And when we started working with customers and just talking to other folks whom we wanted to use the technology, we very quickly realized that a lot of lenders said, we want to use this platform right now. We think we are ready, it's ready for us. And we don't really think you need to do a lot of lending to prove your model. And that meant Neo could now fast forward ahead to where we want to be a technology company and just provide the technology to these lenders. And that's an important step, to be able to listen to other folks and say that, yes, I want to change my business model and I want to be a technology provider earlier than I thought it would. That's pretty important when you're doing figuring out a product market fit, is to be able to do it in the most cost-effective way. The best way to do that is to listen to customers and adapt. Remember that whatever business plan you think up on the back of paper napkin never survives when you first talk to customers. There's always something that you had missed and customers ask for that you should be willing to listen and adapt to. And finally, each pivot you do needs to be a controlled test, and it needs to have budget constraints. Because last thing you want to do is think that you're going after a certain market when you talk to customers, only to realize that you didn't have enough money to do that. So at Neo, for example, when we realized we could just be a tech provider earlier on in our life, I set up a control test where I said, I want to try and get 3 different kinds of auto lenders on the platform with a certain budget allocated to it over a period of 3 to 6 months, and then be able to have them use the platform to figure out, am I just going to go after lenders who are regional versus I'm going to go after subprime consumers versus thin credit consumers or thin credit loans. So be sure to keep track of the budget every time you change your business model because you don't want to get lost in the new sea of change with new requests coming in. And then finally, again, as we have talked to all the way from idea through market fit, remember the goal is to get to product market fit before enthusiasm and money runs out. I now have a few slides where it talks about just general best practices and not just items referring to a startup as it goes to product market fit. So this, the heading's gone, but this slide is all about auto finance industry intricacies, like something very specific to auto finance. It's a fragmented market, and it has a lot of stakeholders, including dealerships who play a very critical role in getting an auto loan funded. When you're dealing with this kind of a market, you really cannot have a scaling strategy earlier on. You have to onboard each customer manually, work with them, and specifically the first few, maybe 5 to 10, in a very hands-on way. It costs a lot. You may make multiple visits to customers. You might sit with them. You might do everything that seems like, how am I going to even get to the 100th customer if it costs me so much time and energy to put the first few customers on? But quite frankly, that's an important step. It's called a manual go-to-market strategy. I can share some literature on it later on, but it helps tech startups, specifically ones working in fragmented or marketplaces, to launch by working very hands-on with their early set of customers, making sure the right set of features are built into the product, and then using the references from the initial set of customers and those use cases and the scaling of technology to be able to grow to 100 with a much less cost involved. Auto finance is a regulated industry. What this means is you cannot use the same approach that a typical technology company like Facebook does by spending a lot of money in acquiring customers without really generating revenue and using your million customer base to raise more funds, then go out and get to 10 million and then raise more funds and scale to a huge number before you even bother about revenue. That can't be done in auto finance industry. It's a regulated industry. It's slow scaling. Even after customers have said yes, just to get a lot of legal work done and launching them takes almost up to 2 weeks to a month. Hence, revenue becomes important. You need to be able to generate revenue if you want to stay alive and be able to raise more funds and scale. So that's something that's a takeaway from anybody who's looking to launch a tech startup is you cannot use the same strategy that other tech startups do of just acquiring customers. You need to be able to show revenue too. And finally, because there is a lot of regulatory focus on auto lending at this point, it just makes it difficult to get the early customers, the early adopters. So you have to engage in more conversations before you get your first set of customers you can use to find product market fit. So I'll also share some time management hacks I have come along. Time management is a huge topic, and these are just some of the things I keep track of to make sure I'm focusing on the right things and managing my time well. I typically only plan 4 to 5 hours of work each day. That doesn't mean I only work 4 to 5 hours. I still work a lot, but a lot of time is spent in helping my team members or other activities that are not necessarily productive to the goals I had set for myself to achieve. So for those specific goals, I only plan 4 to 5 so that I don't feel that I have backlogged myself each day and then suddenly it starts to becoming a stressful environment. Remember that doing is better than perfect. Spend only so much time in planning, but just start doing something. And as you're working on it, you can iteratively make it better. But if you can do something even 60 to 70% right the first time with less planning, just go ahead and do it. You just learn from it and it'll help you achieve the final goal in a shorter amount of time. I only work on things that have the biggest impact. In fact, I don't have more than 3 items on my list that I think will have the biggest impact in the coming month for NEO. And usually the third one I don't even focus on. I focus on the first, number 1 and number 2, primarily the number 1. And that comes back to, do one thing right. When you're doing something in a day, don't switch context. Don't try to work on 2 different projects. You just won't be able to achieve anything. Pick one thing, pick a time block, finish it, move on to the next one. Having meetings early during the day helps. Like I'm in Pacific time zone and it's just 10:30 a.m. my time. Allow the fact that I'm doing this presentation in the morning, because if this was in the afternoon, I would be spending my entire time leading up to the presentation to making tweaks to the presentation and trying to be as perfect as I can about it. The fact that your meetings are done in the morning means it leaves the rest of your day open for you to do that 4 to 5 hours of productive work. And then delegate if somebody else can do it 80% right. It can be you doing everything. Delegation is something very important that every entrepreneur needs to learn, because it's all about teamwork. It just can't be one person doing everything the right way. I'm blessed by the fact that I have a very supportive wife and family as I'm trying to do this startup. Startups are really hard. They cut across everything of your personal life. You may have to fly at the last minute to meet a customer, and you are the one who was responsible to pick up your kids from the daycare or maybe take them to the doctor. Well, who steps in? It's your wife. So make sure you have your wife's support. A mindset of this is our business and we are in it together goes a long way. And that's the kind of mindset my wife and I share about NEO. We see this as an opportunity for us to build something that's going to be meaningful and hopefully at the end of the day make us rich. It helps a lot because when critical decisions need to be made, for example, as I mentioned, I went out to raise funds, and my first time around, I couldn't raise funds. In 6 weeks, I realized I won't get the money I wanted to kind of start paying myself and start paying some of my employees more, and then starting to grow the business. We had to make a hard decision to stop fundraising. Well, as a family, we were banking on the fact that I would be able to raise funds. That led to some tough decisions. And because both of us were bought into the concept of NEO, my wife was able to say, why don't we halt the daycare for our kids, because it was time for them to start interacting with other kids. Maybe we delay that for a few months and use that money and savings to bootstrap the company and come back to it when you've actually raised funds. I mean, that's something you cannot engage in until you think it's your business. And finally, don't neglect your family. There may be times you have to be away, but make a conscious effort when you're back in town to spend more time with your family, because then they'll appreciate it and they'll understand when you need to be away. Now, here's an interesting slide where I'm going to kind of go on to a little bit of lighter side. Why are startup founders always unhappy? If you are truly a close friend of a startup founder or a family member, and you talk to them, even though they may not admit, you realize that they're always worried. They're always worried because this is the typical growth of a startup. It's ups and downs. It may be trending up, but it's always ups and downs are pretty much on a daily or a weekly basis. If you look at this graph, a normal person would say that point B is better than point A, mainly because the startup has made progress. It's gone up and to the right. Well, in fact, humans are very bad about judging absolute values. We may be in an aircraft and we won't know the difference between 300 mile an hour or 500 mile an hour. But when an aircraft is accelerating from 300 to 500, we realize the difference. So we are good at understanding acceleration or deceleration. We are not good at understanding absolute values. So what that means is how a startup founder feels is the first derivative of this graph. At point A, even though a lot of progress had not been made, something good was happening with the startup. Maybe you had a good hire. Maybe you got a good customer. Maybe a customer project is working well, and you're on a high. That's what the point A is. And further along the line, you maybe have come to 5 customers, but a key employee left, or you're starting to run out of money and achieving key milestones, and suddenly there's a downturn for you, and then B feels a lot worse. So this is the reason why startup founders are mostly just worried. It's because of the ups and downs. But what you have to remember is having a sense of humor helps along the process. Here's a quote that somebody I know made. He basically said, if you're not an alcoholic and you're into your startup, you're probably doing something wrong. And with that, I would like to open this up to questions. And Marcy, can I take this over?
Thank you so much, Navin, for that excellent presentation. We are going to open up the call for Q&A. There are instructions on your screen, but to ask question, please raise your hand by going to the My Mood button at the top of the screen and choose the Raise Hand option. When it is your turn to ask a question, I will address you by name and your line will be unmuted. You'll hear a notification, line unmuted, at which time you are free to ask a question. And after you have finished your question, you will hear the line muted, which signifies that you are no longer in the Q&A queue. If you wish to re-enter the Q&A queue, simply click the raise hand button again. As people are queuing up, I actually have a couple of questions for you, Navin. First off, I was hoping you might be able to offer a little bit of guidance on the time frame for those milestones. I know there aren't fixed time frames, but even just some idea of how long each step in the process might take.
Sure. So ideation typically would be about 3 months. Shouldn't really stretch to 6 months. What you're really trying to do is maybe within the first month, list down all the ideas you want to go after. You want to start with maybe 5 to 10, and then spend the next couple of months engaging in conversations with a lot of smart people who can really drill holes in the idea. And then just pick one that you're passionate about from what's left over. So that typically takes 3 months. Building a team is an ongoing process, but earlier on, at least to get the core members on, you probably want another 3 months or so, 3 to 6 months. Fundraising takes 6 months, sometimes up to 9 months. And then product market fit is another couple of years. It takes, unless you're lucky, you're probably not going to have a product that hits the nail on the head. And it takes a couple of years of experimentation and maybe 2 to 3 pivots of changing your target market, changing your customers. So totally about 3 years, I would think.
Excellent. Thank you. Also, just curious, this relates to the startup customers and the feedback, but is there a specific feedback mechanism that you find works best? Does it have to be something formal? Is it just, let me check in with you after we release this or after we make a change, and how do you like it? What's your reaction to it?
Actually, the less informal it is in the early stages, the better. You really want your early customers to feel that you're part of their team and that you're building this with them. So I make personal customer visits. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Marcy, can you hear me? Oh,
yes, I hear you.
I felt my line drop. Sorry. So I make personal customer visits and sit there in front of them. It doesn't matter if they are a small, low volume customer or a high volume customer. And mostly it's just sitting with them, making a simple list, sending an email to everybody. It's not really this formal requirements gathering that you would think. I think the key thing is to take those requirements, communicate it to everybody over email, and make sure you actually deliver functionality that does that real quickly, rather than preparing a document that tells everybody what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We have a question here from a participant. What were the 2 gaps you discovered halfway into the funding process? My thought earlier on, because I was going to do lending, and just to prove the model, I had to only do a small number of loans. I'm not really going to get into specific metrics because that's strategic, but I was going to do a few number of loans, and I really didn't feel that I needed to have the distribution mechanism, like X number of dealerships and such on the platform, able to achieve that step. And the feedback I got was, no, we would like to see a distribution strategy. And that's what you have to set up, because that's your long-term goal. Your long-term goal is to distribute through dealerships and not have some other mechanism to prove this. So that was the primary feedback I got, was being able to show a distribution mechanism. Okay. What about some suggestions for how to go about finding the right core team members? You know, it's a little bit different dynamic than, you know, staffing up an existing company. And you talk about some of the qualities that you're looking for, but, you know, how do you actually, you know, get those people on the team?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it requires a lot of hard work, networking, and a bit of luck. Quite frankly, finding early team members, especially right now in Silicon Valley, is really difficult, probably in auto finance also, because both technology companies and investments are booming, and so is auto finance industry that's booming. So it just means that a lot of good people have a lot of good offers. And what I look for is people who find that this idea is something that's going to be hugely successful and they feel passionate about it. Then the conversation becomes easy. So I think it's all about networking on an ongoing basis, using all kinds of mechanisms like LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is great for you to be able to connect to somebody and if you have a great idea, being able to communicate that and have at least a conversation with them. But mostly you have to network hard and network continuously.
Excellent. What about, you know, you have a bullet point in here on, you know, listening to customers and adapting, but what if you get conflicting requests or conflicting feedback from customers? You know, how do you go about reconciling that and moving forward?
That's a good question. And quite frankly, that applies not just to customers, it also applies to institutional fundraising. When you go out talking to investors, you know, investors won't really tell you no. They'll just make you go away by giving you some feedback. They don't want to invest in your company, but they give you feedback, but the feedback can be confusing, just like when you're talking to customers. I have a rule of thumb. When one person tells me something specific, I pay attention. I mean, I note it down. When a second competent person in that space, so it might be a second investor who puts money in lending, or a customer who has a lot of experience in this space, tells me something, I pay attention. So second time I pay attention. And when a third person says it, I just do it. If it involves, and that's what happened with fundraising. When the third investor who invests in my space told me, you're too early, you need to fix this, I just stopped everything and fixed it. And that's how you do with customer development also. Listen, but build where you see value, which means if 3 people have told you they need it, it's probably the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. What about biggest challenge, you know, from the start until the point you're at right now? You know, what was kind of the biggest challenge, or maybe, you know, the hardest thing to change? You know, you mentioned, let's say, you know, delegate if someone else can do it 80% right. You know, for me, that's a hard thing to do. You know, which of those, you know, was kind of the hardest to implement?
So I'm going to talk about the top 2 hardest, mainly because the hardest always is raising funds. You can talk to the most successful entrepreneurs of public companies who have raised funds, institutional funds, VC funds, find that to be the hardest, and so was my experience. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to everybody who's bootstrapping their company because they're not going after VCs. I think the second hardest thing for me personally was public speaking, or more importantly, being able to walk up to somebody, a potential customer, and start talking to them about my idea in order to be able to sell them to at least try it. That's a gap I always had in my experience, and I think a lot of technologists have the same problem. Or somebody who has a great idea in auto finance lending is good with credit models, but hasn't really had a chance to do business development. That's something I had to learn, and that was the most difficult thing to do, to be able to just walk up and talk to a stranger and have them buy into your product.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions, so I think we will wrap it up. Again, Navin, thank you for a really great presentation, and thank you all for participating in this webinar. The Center for Auto Finance Excellence is committed to bringing you quality content on best practices in auto lending and leasing, and we hope you will join the center at autofinanceexcellence.org. Please be sure to keep an eye open for additional events from the Center for Auto Finance Excellence. Thank you once again to our partner, Fiserv, for their support as well. This concludes today's teleconference. You are free to disconnect. We hope you have a wonderful day.